Right. So overall, we wanted to know what motivated you to start posting preprints this year. Now, after years of publishing in journals, what attracted you to the world of preprints?
Yeah, I think you mentioned, many of the benefits. I think the transparency of, going through the research development process and revision process is something that traditionally I don't think has been, very apparent in all areas of academia. And so um, that's certainly been a nice feature, a nice bonus. Honestly, when I first became aware of preprints, I was kind of vaguely aware of it before, but I had always just submitted directly to academic journals, for peer review, and that process can take so long. And so you're working on a project, and even if it hits, with that first journal that you submit to, it could take a year or more, maybe a couple years, even depending on the journal and the level of the journal. And if it doesn't hit with that journal, you could wait a year before you have a rejection in hand, ready to move on to the next journal to try. In the meantime, the research that you're doing is not impacting anyone or seeing the light of day. And so, over time, as I've moved along in my career and I've become less concerned about kind of the traditional model of academic publishing, um, there are issues with the academic publishing model, and with rankings of journals and all those sorts of things. And over time, I've just become pretty much completely disinterested in playing that game. I've received tenure. I'm a full professor. I don't really need to play that game. I just want to do good research, and I want to make an impact, and I want to be able to move the various fields forward that I'm involved in. And so getting rapid dissemination via preprints is super helpful, and it's transparent, and you don't have to. I mean, it's obviously will hopefully lead to just eventual peer review and publication of all these articles that I might upload as a preprint. But if not, that's fine. Or if it takes a long time for it to land as a peer-reviewed article, just because the process takes a long time, then that's fine too, because it still has the opportunity to have that impact. Um, so I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest reason why it was something that I was interested in doing. Um, Also, I have, I don't know if this is the case for other researchers, but, I do a lot of work, I do a lot of projects, and I, start to have a backlog of stuff. And, there's only so much you can push out to academic journals for peer review all the time, because that is an extensive, time-consuming process in and of itself. So, set aside just doing the good research, but now you have to navigate, the journals and the reviews and the revisions and all those sorts of things, all of which are important, but it's a lot of work. And so I want to be able to get my ideas out there. I want to be able to get my work out there. In some cases, I want to be able to stake a claim, to work that I'm doing, to show that I'm, being innovative and pushing the field forward. And preprints helps, I think, to do all of that in a more timely manner, so that you're not stuck, in the kind of traditional long cycle of peer review in traditional academic journals.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting you mentioned the long peer review process, which what I've noticed is in social sciences and humanities, it's significantly longer
Hmm.
than in STM research areas. Medical journals or life sciences journals tend to have a quicker turnaround these days. However, it seems to me that in social sciences and humanities, they haven't truly embraced preprints. Do you know why that is? why are life sciences more open to preprints in general versus, why are people in social sciences hesitating?
It's a good question. I don't really know the answer. I know for me, um, I had never considered really doing anything like a preprints. Um, there had been on occasion I had posted a working paper to some sort of a repository or something like that, which is essentially what preprints is. Um, but I'd only done that on a few occasions, and often with things that I didn't actually think were going to ever be publishable. Like they weren't things I was going to try to submit to a journal. They were just different types of working papers or things like that that weren't necessarily at that tier or that level of work. So it wasn't something I really ever thought much about. Um, whenever you submit to a journal, a lot of journals, will say this can't be considered anywhere else, blah blah blah. And so I think a lot of people simply don't think it's a viable option. And the
Mhm.
more I, looked into it, I'm like, no, this actually, some journals do have strict policies around preprints, but a lot don't. And in fact, a lot are totally fine with and encourage preprint posting of drafts of articles. And so, the more I started to look into that a little bit, I'm like, huh, okay, so the benefits are all the things I just mentioned. The downside is really not much of any, unless there's certain journals or certain tiers of journals that if you're only shooting for those, perhaps it could be a limitation by posting a preprint. But for the most part, there's just a lot of benefits and there's not a lot of downside. Um, and 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 so I figured, hey, I might as well try it out. And so I started dabbling as I started to submit my initial preprints just to see. I was kind of testing the waters, and sure enough, all of a sudden you start to get um, momentum, with collaborations or with citations or things like that, long before I ever would be able to even think about that, waiting for the traditional cycle. So um, I just think a lot of academics, it's not kind of the traditional model, right? It's not the traditional
Mhm.
workflow. And so I think a lot of people don't really think about it, don't really consider it as a viable option, or don't even know that it's available as a viable option. I think there's also, you mentioned the length to publication, the peer review timeline and process. Um, there's definitely, debates around publishing and, you know, uh, a lot of skepticism, I think, around more rapid publishing. Um, when the peer review process is sped up, um, you know, sometimes people see that as a signal that that's not a viable, credible journal. And that certainly can be the case. It certainly can be the case that it's a predatory journal or not a real journal or something like that. But I've been a reviewer for lots of journals over the years. Um, I don't think that there's necessarily any direct connection between time to publication and peer review timeline, versus the rigor of the peer review process and those sorts of things. It's more about the internal control mechanisms of the journal, the editorial
Mhm.
board, policies, those sorts of things. Those are what make the difference, and not necessarily the timeline. If I want rapid dissemination, you know, I've found that it actually can be completely reasonable to have good quality, rigorous peer review and get things published even within a month or two, um, in in completely legitimate ways. Um, Yet there's a lot of skepticism, I think, around that still because that's a shift in the mindset. And I think in the humanities, the social sciences, I just think that legacy mindset is um, very strong. And engineering or very STEM fields or whatever, they just have a track record of more rapid dissemination. And so I think something like preprints just makes sense and fits within that mindset easier.
Yeah. And when you we're looking for, preprint platforms. Is there something specific that you were looking for or wanted from the platform, and kind of what attracted you to our platform, preprints.org?
Certainly I wanted something that looked credible and um, that allowed for, all the types of collaborative interactions that you mentioned previously. And I just wanted, you can post working papers anywhere, and so I could have done that on my own, research website or something like that. But having the community of researchers available at scale, I think is really important for the purpose of preprints. And so having the opportunity, to get preprint articles indexed and within this a broader academic community, I think all of that was certainly something I was looking for and something I was testing out, and something I think that has really come to fruition as I've done more with preprints.
And then I guess to kind of wrap up, from the conversation, I also got the impression that lack of awareness is a major issue, I think, in general. And I think with awareness, you can also change people's mindset, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any strategies, we could use to engage the community, or is there anything we can do to raise awareness of the benefits and kind of change this mindset?
I just think awareness efforts are important, and so doing things like research webinars, hosted by preprints, with researchers, who have submitted stuff. I think that could be super helpful. You get people to share what they're doing, and people can see, oh, this is actually real good research. I mean, it's really no different than if you go to a conference, right? Sometimes people think, oh, it's not peer reviewed yet, therefore it's not ready for prime time yet. Like, people submit stuff to conferences and go and present on their research that is not yet published all the time, right? That's like the whole
Mhm.
conference um, framework and way that it's always worked in academia. And so I think if people can start to understand, like, preprints is similar. Like, it's a way that you can engage with your community, maybe asynchronously, but have some synchronous opportunities. Um, get your work out there, get it citable, get it uh, get allow opportunities for feedback, all of that. And I think people can start to recognize that you don't necessarily have to pay a huge amount, for conference registration, travel somewhere across the world to go present to a room full of people, or a small, maybe a handful of people in a room, when you can, there's value there, but there's also just value in getting your work out for people to review and to share it that way. So I would love to see more like robust, sharing opportunities through live virtual sessions, webinars, that kind of stuff. I think that would certainly help. Um, and and I really do think this perception will catch up to the reality of, like, the benefits, but it just takes time to shift the mindsets and to increase awareness.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for all your feedback and comments. And yeah, I think it was a really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed it. The parallel with conferences, that's true. And it's something that I personally never thought about, that we do go to conferences and you present something and everyone takes it as true. You put it on a preprint and people, but it's not peer reviewed. So, yeah, great. Well, it was really nice meeting you
Very
today.
nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you also. Okay. Have a good
Bye bye.
afternoon. Bye.